Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Sarah Wong. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Medical staff in certain wards have to take extra tests in the fight against COVID. A man who was given a jail sentence for carrying zip ties has his conviction quashed by Hong Kong's top court. And China's economy in the first 6 months grew by less than half of the country's full-year target. Hong Kong's daily COVID caseload has stayed above 3,500 for the second day in a row. This comes as the hospital authority tightened COVID controls for staff who took after patients with a higher risk of infection. Joanna Ho reports.
From Monday, hospital staff handling patients with higher COVID infection risks, such as those receiving chemotherapy and radiotherapy, have to undergo PCR tests twice a week, on top of their daily rapid antigen tests. Authority Chief Manager Sarah Ho said the medics will receive specimen bags, which they must return to their hospital after doing the sampling at home. The aim is to enhance protection for patients and hospital staff. One more infection occurred at the palliative care ward of the Hong Kong Buddhist Hospital, taking the tally there to 8 patients and 5 staff members. A 98-year-old patient in the orthopedics ward at Queen Elizabeth Hospital tested positive yesterday. 3 other patients have since contracted the virus, and the ward has stopped new admissions and suspended visiting arrangements. The radiology department in Queen Elizabeth Hospital reported another infection, a doctor who is a close contact of a previous case. 3 schools were asked to suspend classes. In a 4th school, St. Catherine's International Kindergarten in Kowloon Tong, transmission in a school bus meant that 26 students who traveled in the vehicle will have to miss face-to-face lessons for a week. 7 school bus drivers and a nanny tested positive after having lunch together. Virus transmission was suspected in one bus, which carried 26 students from classes in the afternoon, after 2 students, the nanny and the driver, reported infections. This comes as the city added 3,574 COVID infections today, 216 of which were imported. Joanna Ho, HKIBC.
New testing arrangements have reduced long queues at Shenzhen Bayport. Those waiting to go to the mainland welcome the new system. Janice Low reports.
Mainland-bound travelers who fail to make an online reservation for a nucleic exit test won't be able to cross the border. And they can only take the test at the reserved time, even if they arrive early. This man said the new arrangement is more convenient because it reduces waiting time. As a result, the long queues seen earlier this week at Shenzhen Bayport have eased. Those who test positive for COVID at the border have to go straight to community isolation facilities. But David Lam, the lawmaker representing the medical and health services sector, said home quarantine should also be an option, provided that registration, issuance of an isolation order, and triage are done immediately at the site. Amendments could be made so as to align the arrangement with the overall anti-epidemic plan. On the government's plan to introduce color codes for the Leave Home Safe app, Lam said that the yellow code should not be restricted to arrivals from overseas. He said close contacts of COVID patients and people who are subjected to compulsory testing should also be issued with a yellow code. Janice Low, HKIBC.
Hong Kong's top court has quashed the conviction of a man who was given a jail sentence for carrying zip ties in 2019. The judges said allowing the scope of the law to become too wide would render it into a thought crime. Kelly Peng reports.
Real estate agent Chen Chen-kit was arrested for carrying 48 zip ties in Victoria Park in 2019. He was convicted of possessing an instrument fit for unlawful purposes and sentenced to 5 months in jail. His lawyer argued in the Court of Final Appeal that zip ties do not fall under the scope of Section 17 of the Summary Offences Ordinance. The judges agreed. Chief Justice Andrew Cheung said the section deems 3 categories of items as instruments fit for unlawful purposes. The first group consists of spears, bludgeons, or other offensive weapons. Second are crowbars, picklocks, skeleton keys, or other instruments fit for unlawful purposes or for gaining unlawful access. The third category includes items such as rosary strings and handcuffs, which are made to physically restrain a person. The court concluded that cable ties do not fall within the third category because they were not made to physically restrain a person. The judges added that allowing the scope of the section to go too wide would turn it into a fourth crime. They unanimously overturned Chan's conviction and sentence. Kelly Pang, HKIBC.
7 people who tried to flee to Taiwan 2 years ago have each been sentenced to 10 months in jail for perverting the course of justice. The defendants, who were facing charges linked to the 2019 unrest, were caught in mainland waters. They pleaded guilty to assisting each other escape from Hong Kong, disrupting police investigations. The judge said they faced severe charges before trying to flee, and their action challenged the judicial system. The government has pledged to be lenient and flexible when dealing with appeals from people who were ruled ineligible for the second phase of the consumption voucher scheme. About 4,000 appeals were received as of Tuesday. More from Joanna Ho.
People continued to queue outside the payout scheme's secretariat in Prince Edward to appeal after being deemed ineligible for the second batch of consumption vouchers worth $5,000. Nearly 250,000 people were told they did not qualify. Many had withdrawn their contributions to the Mandatory Provident Fund, or MPF, to emigrate. But they argued that they meet the eligibility criteria because they have returned, paid tax, and contributed to the MPF again. Speaking on a radio program this morning, Budget and Tax Policy Unit Head Jessie Wong admitted that the MPF screenings had caused trouble to some people. Those seeking a review have to apply within 14 days after receiving a government text message about their ineligibility. Wong was asked if returnees would have to request an immigration record from the Hong Kong government. She said supporting documents such as pay slips will be accepted as long as they show what she called traces of living in Hong Kong. The Inland Revenue Department cannot disclose taxpayers' information because of privacy concerns, and MPF trustees are not required to inform the Mandatory Provident Fund Scheme's authority when someone rejoins. Therefore, Wong said officials of the voucher scheme had no way of knowing if returnees had paid tax or contributed again to the MPF. She urged appellants not to rush to the office in Prince Edward, as there are 8 temporary service centers across the city. Joanna Ho, HKIBC.
Overseas, Sri Lankan lawmakers will choose a new president in the coming week after Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigned via email. Rajapaksa and his wife fled to Singapore, but anti-government protesters in Sri Lanka vowed to carry on the fight. Calm has gradually returned to the streets of Colombo after days of anti-government protests over the island nation's political and economic crises. Violent clashes gave way to celebrations as exhilarated Sri Lankans in the capital rallied outside the office of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. They rejoice over the departure of Rajapaksa, who quit via email after fleeing his bankrupt country to Singapore.
This is a monumental and a historic victory for all Sri Lankans, all of us.
Singapore said Rajapaksa was on a private visit and hasn't asked for asylum. The city-state also warned against unauthorized assemblies after a small group of Sri Lankans protested against Rajapaksa's arrival at the airport. The Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Abewardena, announced that lawmakers will elect a new president within a week. The opposition is trying to put together a broad coalition, while the ruling party favors acting president Ranil Wickremesinghe to take the reins. But a renewed wave of anger could be unleashed if Wickremesinghe is tasked with steering the country out of the turmoil. The six-time prime minister has ordered the military to quell the latest unrest that has seen at least one death and scores of injuries. China's economy came under pressure in the second quarter, contracting 2.6% from the previous 3 months. For the first half of the year, gross domestic product grew 2.5%, far below Beijing's target for full-year growth. Macy Mock reports.
China's gross domestic product, or GDP, fell 2.6% between April and June from the first quarter. The retreat in the world's second biggest economy was blamed on full or partial lockdowns in commercial hub Shanghai and other cities during COVID outbreaks. The lockdown in Shanghai ended only last month. Fu Linghui, spokesman for the National Bureau of Statistics, said China's economy came under pressure in the second quarter because of COVID domestically and the challenging international environment. Despite contracting quarter-on-quarter, China's GDP between April and June grew 0.4% from the same period last year. But it was the slowest growth rate in 2 years as COVID caused economic turmoil globally. For the first half of 2022, GDP expanded by 2.5% from a year earlier, but it was well below Beijing's full-year target of 5.5%.
In Q2, we overcame various challenges and achieved steady growth. Going forward, despite the negative impacts both at home and abroad, the fundamentals for sound growth in China remain unchanged. Our economy is expected to maintain steady growth.
Although China's major economic indicators plunged in April, there were signs of recovery last month. Retail sales rose by 3.1% from a year ago, marking the quickest growth in 4 months, while industrial activity also picked up. Maisie Mock, HKIBC.
Hong Kong investors were dismayed by China's economic data and trimmed their portfolios. The Hang Seng Index lost 2.2% today, but for the week it was down 6.6%, the biggest slump in more than 2 years. Alibaba plunged 6%, following a report that Shanghai officials summoned the e-commerce giant's cloud division in connection with leaks of police data. A positive profit alert drove BYD up 4% after the carmaker said it expects first-half earnings of around 3.6 billion yuan. Now let's take a look at the markets. The Hang Seng Index closed down 453 points. Top 10 active stocks: Tencent down $10, BYD Company up $11.20, and Alibaba down $6.50. Meituan down $3.30, AIA down 90 cents, and Ping An down $1.25. Forex trading against Hong Kong dollar, euro at 7.89, British pound 9.29, and Australian dollar at 5.30. Over to the UK market, FTSE 100 is up 61 points. On to the weather now, mainly fine apart from isolated showers. Tomorrow, temperatures range between 29 and 34 degrees. The heat wave will stay with us for at least another week. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for Friday night. Our main news tomorrow will be at 7:30 p.m. I'm Sarah Wong. I will be back with the late news at 11. Good night.